My goal in doing some of these sessions and meeting regularly and sharing some ideas is to help improve, alter, change the quality of your life. My focus and my intention is not to provide inspiration. My focus is to provide some form of education, to provide some form of insight, enlightenment, create an environment where when we get together, when we talk, when we share ideas, that you are perhaps made aware of what you already know. Perhaps you're reminded of what you already understand, but may not have been making the most of it lately. Perhaps to help you raise your level of consciousness so that you can get more of what you want and you could become more of who you really are. My focus really is to try and pull out the potential that I know you have in you. You see, we all have greatness within. The challenge for us, and including myself, because this is a journey, is for many of us, including myself, when I started, very few of us could comprehend or accept the concept that we have greatness within. We would always, and I would always look up to other people who had achieved so much, and I would say, I wish. And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that the people who I admired, they weren't smarter or better than myself. They had simply developed their talents and gifts. But more than anything, the more I looked at them as though they were perhaps much more special, the more I realized that what I was looking at were my own rejected thoughts. That the thoughts that I rejected for myself, they accepted and they embraced it and they took the challenge and they prospered and they pushed towards their potential. And as I started to study them, I realized that most of them were very similar to you and I. And most of them were very, very capable of achieving greatness, but also capable of not finding greatness. But it came down to a choice. And as I started to study them in more detail, I realized that there were certain things that successful people do. And those actions they took created certain outcomes and results. And those actions came in three parts. One was physical, in terms of hard work and persistence and grit. The second was mental. That had to do with how they used their mind, the quality of their thinking, their ability to reason, their ability to focus, the ability to use their mental faculties. And finally, and thirdly, was emotional. They had this interesting way of controlling their emotions, that they weren't very emotional about certain things. For example, when it came to making critical decisions, they had this unique ability to think rationally rather than emotively. When it came to business and investing, that they realized that investing in business is an intellectual sport, and you use your thinking faculty, critical thinking, as opposed to your emotions. And therefore, when it came to the results that they were creating, it was simply an effect of a cause, and that the cause was the actions, those habits they had, and the effect was the result. And so I decided that I would study them and I would model them, and that I would replicate some of those actions, because I figured that the law of cause and effects, which is what we call the law of iron destiny, it works. If you put in the work, you get the outcome. Some people call it the law of sowing and reaping. Some others call it the law of karma, the law of action and reaction. All depends on whether you go to science, whether you go to religion, whether you go to psychology or theology. It doesn't really matter. But the law of cause and effect works. And as I started to implement some of those principles, those actions, I started to change my life. And so part of what I do in getting together with you all and sharing some ideas is to create the same environment that I was given. And that environment is not to really tell you what to do, but to take you away from the busy world that you're normally in and put you in an environment where you are thinking, where your focus is on one particular thing, what I'm sharing, or your focus is less distracted from all the various thoughts that you normally have. Psychologists tell us that we have between 50 and 70, for some people even close to 90,000 thoughts per day. And the challenge we have is, how do we stay focused? And how do we go within and disconnect from the world around us to enable us be still and listen to that still small voice within? One of the things I learned in studying successful people was this ability to follow their intuition. Some people say follow your gut. They had developed this ability, and it's a craft. It's not something that you just do. The reason it's not easy to develop is because it requires a lot of discipline and focus. A lot of us often feel as though we're alone when it comes to making the most important decisions of our life. I can promise you all that that's not the case. Leadership is loneliness, yes, because whether you have a partner or wife, a team, a colleague, friends around you supporting you, it's still a very lonely experience because you have to make the decisions yourself. And at the point you're making the decision, you're alone. But you're not alone in the full sense of things. And by that, what I simply mean is physically you're alone, but there's someone within you. And as I studied successful people, I found that they had this quite interesting understanding about themselves. And they were very comfortable with their intuition. They were very comfortable with listening and following their guts. But they were comfortable doing that because they had developed that ability. So for most of us, what we call our instinct or our gut or intuition is simply our emotions. It's simply perhaps hunches. And some of those hunches are not really trained. Remember that you have 5 senses: sense of sight, touch, smell, taste, and sound. We're taught how to use those sensory faculties. Very few of us have been trained or taught how to use our mental higher faculties: imagination, reason, perception, will, memory, intuition, and memory. I said memory earlier on. And as a result of that, we're not really sure about what to do. So many times when we perhaps are at the crossroads of where we have to make an important decision, we get stuck. And sometimes, because it's an important decision, we're emotionally involved at that point in time. And our dominant emotion, if it's fear, we interpret that emotion as our instincts or our intuition, which is incorrect. Sometimes we might be so excited if it's something we're passionate about, because we have this dream, because we're so passionate about it. We interpret the excitement we have as a sign from our intuition, giving us the go-ahead to proceed. But that is not also true. You might go to a doctor and meet a doctor, and you say to the doctor, a medical doctor, and you start to describe the symptoms you have. And as soon as you start to describe the symptoms, they smile and they say, I think, even before you finish, they say, I think this is the problem. You might also go to a surgeon and say, listen, I'm having this problem. Based on your experience, what do you think it could be? And they might be able to tell you. Now, the reason they can do that is because they've developed experience for so many years. And because they've done it so many times, they have seen so many symptoms that are similar to what you've described. And therefore, they can, based on the description you've provided, they can say, I think this is the real problem. This is the cause. So in many cases, some people and some successful people go with their gut. But that gut has come from experience, nurtured, developed experience. The experience has come through critical thinking, rational thinking, but it's also come from reflection on failures that they've had or setbacks they've had, perhaps where they've assumed something to be true and it hasn't turned out well, and they've reviewed their performance and made corrections. So when they see symptoms, they can say, based on my experience, I know what this might be. So they've developed their gut, their instinct, their intuition based on knowledge, based on understanding, and based on wisdom, which is really application. On the other hand, there's another class of people who have developed their intuition and their instincts based on their ability to listen to what we call the still small voice within. Every one of us has that voice within. That voice is what we call spirit, infinite intelligence, universal intelligence. You might call it nature, you might call it life, you might call it God, you might call it Allah, Buddha. You can call it whatever you choose. But there is a power, an intelligence that exists within us. That intelligence and that power is all wisdom, is all knowing, is boundless grace, but it sits there silently because it doesn't interfere with our affairs, but is there to help and guide us. But it sits there in a passive way. And occasionally, because it's there to guide you and help you and nurture you, it speaks to you. But it speaks in a gentle voice and in a gentle way. And for many of us, we do not know when this voice is speaking to us because we haven't developed the ability to listen. And so what I'm really talking about with you guys today is simply learning the ability to listen to the still small voice within you. I know for some of you, you may remember perhaps you were about to do something and something said to you, it felt like a hunch, a pull, something, prompted you to perhaps stop before you crossed the road and look to the left and look to the right again. Although you had looked before you decided to cross, but something just, you kind of felt as though something was holding you back and said, you have to look again. And as you looked, you found that there was a very fast oncoming vehicle that if you hadn't looked, perhaps it could have been an accident. Some of you perhaps have walked into an environment and something in you has said, I think you should leave and leave now. As soon as you've left, something has happened in the space, or something has said, listen, I don't want you to get to know this person. I want you to stay away from this person. And so you stay away, you back away, and you find that you have peace. Or perhaps you refuse, you get connected, you develop a relationship, and eventually you get hurt. Each and every one of us has this intelligence that speaks to us in a very silent and quiet voice. And if you look at the likes of Thomas Edison, and you look at the likes of Nikola Tesla, and you look at the likes of Henry Ford, Albert Einstein, the Wright brothers, if you look at the people who have created great changes in our world, if you look at the poets, William Shakespeare, if you look at the likes of some of the great artists, Michelangelo, you look at the likes of Picasso. The name escapes me, but there's an artist who wrote Jerusalem. Probably one of the most important pieces of poetry and literature and visionary words ever written. For some reason, the name escapes me right now. I'm sure it will come back to me in a short while. He's English. He was an Englishman. William Blake. William Blake, one of the most significant writers of our times. If you listen to their life stories, all of the people I've just described, one of the consistent themes in each of those lives is the fact that every discovery that they had, every major breakthrough, perhaps every significant piece of literature or art or design or sculpture or painting or perhaps invention or idea, they would tell you that it came from their subconscious mind, that it came at a point where it felt as if something within them was giving them the answers. Now, they had perhaps pondered on some of, the solutions and tried to find answers for a long time. And in a very simple, soft way, the answers were revealed to them. And it felt as if something within them was speaking out and they could hear it. You and I have the same ability. The difference is we need to develop that ability much further. There's so much noise. Every time and every day, every part of the time during the day, there's a thought going through your mind. And meditation is a pathway that allows you to communicate and commune with infinite intelligence, commune with this inner voice within you. And part of that process requires that you still your mind, that you disconnect from the world, that you do what the great author said, go into your closet and shut the door. And by that, what the author meant was disconnect yourself from the external world and shut the door of your mind so that there's peace and there's quiet so that you can listen. Now, for many of us, the words from the inner voice within us is coming to us always. We can't hear it because there's so much noise. Noise not from external noise or music, but noise from our internal words and dialogue and speech, that we have to get to a point where we become silent and we just listen. Now, there are two things that I'd like you to go away with as I try and bring this to a close. I'm not suggesting that you find somewhere to sit quietly. No, what I'm suggesting is that you find a method that allows you to find silence within you, not at a particular time in the day, but throughout the whole day. The best way of doing that is by controlling your thoughts. Control your thoughts, you control your focus. If you control your focus, you control the energy flow within and through you. If you do that, you change how you feel. And so one of the ways of changing the process of listening to yourself is through focus. I want to talk about a different, perhaps, concept or idea, which is, I want you to start seeing the inner part of you as not something external to you. I want you to start seeing this intelligence, this greatness as part of you, which means that every time you have a thought in your mind, you're communicating with the inner one within you. I want you to stop seeing it as something external. And I want you to every day now go forward and let it be that you're having a conversation with yourself and communicate with yourself. So the mistake most people make, and this is what I have found in my experience, and let's use an example. Let's say you're about to buy a real estate investment, significant investment, or maybe you're about to buy maybe some securities or equity investment in a company. Significant. Some of us, when we get to making big decisions, then we say, listen, we say God, we say Allah, we say Buddha, we say life, we say Mother Nature, we say divine help, healing. I need your help. Some of us don't even ask. We just decide to listen then. Unfortunately, communication is a two-way process. You can't just ignore all through the whole day, month, year, and then expect when you need some communicating that it'll be ready waiting for you. So one of the things you have to do is learn how to induce and intelligently call on grace. And by grace, what I mean is this. I want you to think about this. A young child never talks to her mother. Every time the mother tries to speak to her, the young child says, I'm not interested, I'm too busy. The mother keeps trying that every single day for maybe 300 days out of a whole year. And sometimes the mother says, you know what, I'm just going to be quiet. Maybe she really doesn't want to hear me speak. And then the young girl comes and sits next to the mother, maybe on the 359th day of the year, and sits there for just 2 minutes. And what do you think the mother is going to do? The mother is going to wait, because she's been trying to communicate with the child for so many days in the year, and the child has said no. In the same way, you and I have this unique relationship with our inner self. We make the same mistake like the child does, which is she just sits down and waits. One of the things the child has to do to get the mother communicating is first of all sit down and say, Mum, I acknowledge you, and I need your help, or I need to talk, or Mum, I know I've been difficult for so long, but I want to talk. Or you sit down there and just say, Mom, I know you love me, and I know you care about me, and I'd like to talk to you. I want to hear what you have to say. Now, this sounds weird, but everyone who's achieved greatness at a certain level, go back to the names I described earlier on, they did the same thing. They would ponder on an idea, a solution they were trying to solve, and they would try, and at the end, when they couldn't, they would say, I'm going to turn this over to my subconscious mind. And they would say, listen, subconscious mind, this is what I want. This is the outcome I want. I want you to show me how to achieve this goal. I know I cannot do it by myself, but I know the wisdom is in me, and I know that you have all knowledge, all power, all intelligence, all grace. So I'm turning this request over to you, and I want you to communicate and bring the answers through me, through the right means appropriate. And they let it go. And then what you find is that in a strange way, it might not be immediately. It could be a few minutes afterwards. It could be a day, it could be a year. But you find that in a strange way, it could be even in a dream. It could be perhaps they're having a shower, walking down the street. The inner voice speaks and comes to their aid and says, this is the answer to what you want. You and I have to learn how to do the same thing. But if you haven't been listening to your inner voice, when you need help, the first thing you have to do is learn to communicate first and take the position of an apologetic child. Just like the parable of the son, the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son, where it says that this prodigal son was from a very wealthy family, decided that he had had enough being in the house and he wanted to go and do his own thing. So he said to his father, I'd like you to just count up everything that you own, father, all of your estate. I'm entitled to half of your estate. So is my brother. I'd like you to give me my own part now. I don't want to wait until you're gone or you're dead. I'd like you to give me my part now. And I'm going to leave. I've had enough being under your roof, being a son. I want to go do my own thing. So the father tried to reason with him, and eventually the father said, since you've made up your mind, I'll give you everything that I would have given you. So the father gives him everything. I'm not going to bore you with the story, but the account of the story says that the son went away and he partied and he lived and he had fun, had a great time. And eventually he spent it all. He spent it all and got to the point where he couldn't even feed himself. But he decided, after suffering for a period of time, he came to him and he said to himself, he said, listen, if I go back to my father and I ask for forgiveness, my Father will forgive me, because in my Father's house, my Father's servants have much more than I do now. And I know that my Father's servants do not suffer and they want for nothing. Then how can I, as son, be here starving and I have nothing? So he went back. And as soon as his father saw him, his father was excited. His father, according to the accounts of the story, threw a party, brought out the best, cattle, and cooked the best food, and put a robe on him and welcomed him back and restored him to his rightful position. Now, in the same way, each and every one of us, occasionally, we are like that prodigal son. We go away, we do our thing, we don't listen. But to be restored back to what we want and to listen and hear what we need to go back and say, I'm sorry. And I think perhaps as you leave today, I want you to go away with that. Many of us are looking for answers without. You're all looking for answers without. What books do I need to read? What mentors do I need to have? You come and I share ideas with you. You're still looking for answers without, because you're listening to me. There's nothing wrong with that, because occasionally the answer will come through people or experiences or events or circumstances. But you must not neglect the most important source of communication, because if you listen, in many cases, you don't have to go through this long-winded process of trying to find the answer outside when the answer is being laid in front of you from within. So I want you all to leave here with this understanding that everything you need is within you. But I want you to start learning how to listen to the still small voice within you. And the great thing about this is, if you develop the passion and the desire to listen, you'll find that you'll become clear. That the more you practice it, the more you start to realize it becomes clear when the inner voice is speaking to you. And one of the things I do in my case, and I'll share this with you, is I might wake up in the morning and I might say to the inner voice within me, and I will give you something. I have affirmations that I use. I have personal statements, and I have self-talk statements. I affirm myself, but in affirming myself, I also affirm the intelligence within me. I praise the intelligence within me. And even when I ask for things, I sometimes will conclude with a statement that says, not my will, but yours be done. Now that's an important statement, because sometimes what you're asking for is not good for you. You think it's what you want, you think it's what you need, but you don't realize that it's not right for you. So sometimes I make requests and I say, I want to achieve this and I need guidance, but not my will, but yours be done. And that simply means I'm giving you the authorization, I'm giving you the permission, because remember, the intelligence within you sits passively. But by making that statement, I'm saying I'm giving you the permission now to stop me, to guide me, or direct me towards my true purpose or my true destiny. Because what I might be choosing based on my intelligence may not be good enough. And because you're omnipresent, you're omniscient, you're all wisdom, you're all understanding, you're all intelligence, you're all power, you can see and you know much more than I do. And by making that request, you might call it a prayer, you might say meditation, you might say communication or communion with self. What I find is occasionally, sometimes I might wake up and the night before I had a plan. But before going to sleep, I may have said my prayers. I may have gone within and shared my thoughts. I wake up in the morning with a completely different plan. A plan that was very different, that I hadn't thought about, but a plan that takes me quicker to my goal, much faster, saves me time, saves me money, and more than anything, saves me the emotional baggage. And by doing that, that is the inner one in me guiding me. And I found that every time that happens, the outcome is always much more positive than anything that I could have done. So I'll encourage you all to start to practice this. Make it a daily habit where you're communing and communicating with yourself. And you can do this to the point where it gets really interesting, where everything you do during the day, there's a conversation happening within you. And the more you do that, the more you develop a relationship with the still small voice within. and the more you're guided towards your true destiny. I hope that helps.